Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be reviewing the performance of number 61, Justin Braun, yet another player who actually will not be on the Sharks squad come the start of next season due to the fact that he was traded to the Philadelphia Flyers around the time of the draft due to salary cap constraints the Sharks needed to deal with, trying to sign players like Pavelski, which didn't end up working out, but also like Meyer and LeBanc. Now, Justin Braun has long time been a pretty solid defenseman, or had long time been a pretty solid defenseman for the Sharks, normally finding himself on the pairing of Marc-Edouard Vlasic, and most people outside of the Sharks atmosphere felt as though Braun was carried pretty heavily by Vlasic, but I'm sure most Sharks fans still respected the performance of Justin Braun and knew while he wasn't as good as Vlasic, he certainly wasn't a slouch on that one of the top defensive pairings in the NHL in terms of defense. However, with the arrival of Erik Karlsson and the expected top four pairings being Burns and likely Joakim Ryan or Šimek, and then Karlsson and Vlasic, it was expected Braun would have to take a step back this season, and while Karlsson and Vlasic as a pairing didn't work out and ended up being Karlsson and Dylan a lot, and so Braun did still find himself with Vlasic a good amount of the time, Braun did still take a step back, not only in terms of, a priority on the ice, but also in terms of performance, sadly. So his frequent pairings during the regular season were him and Vlasic, as well as him and Dylan. This took up about 80% of the time Braun was on the ice. It was very close between these two pairings, so I decided to include them both. But in the playoffs, Braun's most frequent partner was actually Joakim Ryan, making up close to 30% of the time that Justin Braun was on the ice. So it just goes to show that, the smaller priority that Justin Braun really got in terms of ice time, where when Ryan, who was sort of like the black sheep of the Sharks defense during the playoffs, when he had to be sent on the ice for the couple minutes he would get per game, it would usually be Justin Braun sort of filling in and, in a way, babysitting for Joakim Ryan, while the other fourth Sharks defenseman rested up. Now, for his performance during the regular season, as I said, somewhat disappointing. 78 games played, so he played the majority of them, only missing a couple due to injury. 2 goals and 14 assists for 16 points. Even for a defensive defenseman like Justin Braun, that is somewhat disappointing. You're usually looking for at least a good 20, probably 25 points in that regard. But also, what was very disappointing for Justin Braun was his team worst minus 14. Only Marc-Edouard Vlasic was in that realm at minus 8. So Justin Braun, on a winning team like the Sharks, they were second in the Pacific Division. It's actually a big surprise to see one of their better defensive defensemen being this low of a minus. And so it goes to show that Justin Braun didn't really have necessarily the most success on the ice. Of course, many people will say plus minus is a flawed stat, but being minus 14 and so far away from the rest of your team is never really a good look, especially when you are on a winning team, so it's not necessarily expected. His penalty minutes were 35. That includes one major, meaning he had 15 minor penalties over the course of the regular season. Not terrible, but also not that great. And his time on ice was still a pretty solid 20 minutes and 18 seconds, normally where you would expect for a top 4 defenseman. However, that is a solid minute less than what he was getting last season. And speaking of last season, his point total of 16 points this season were just about half of what they were last season, where he got 33 points. So as I said, not only was it a step back in terms of role for Justin Braun, but he also took a step back in terms of performance. In the playoffs, Justin Braun played every single game, but only got a single assist. That would put him on pace for just 4 points over an entire season. You would hope Justin Braun would at least get a goal and maybe 3, 4, 5 assists during the playoffs, but that didn't occur. His plus minus at least wasn't minus 14, but still not a great minus 3. His penalty minutes, certainly nothing to write home about at 8 penalty minutes, but when you compare it to the Sharks' other top 4 defensemen, take a look at Brent Burns, who only had 6 penalty minutes, one less penalty in 7 more minutes of ice time per game. That is pretty jarring. So Justin Braun, it's not terrible to have 8 penalty minutes, but also not great in comparison to some of the other Sharks defensemen. And his time on ice was still a decently solid 21 minutes and 28 seconds, but again, another full minute less than what he was getting last year in the playoffs. And as I said, he was on Joakim Ryan duty a lot and wasn't necessarily the priority to get on the ice when the Sharks needed to, let's say, at even strength, prevent a goal from being scored. The Avalanche would send on their McKinnon line. The Sharks would pretty frequently send on Burns and Vlasic instead of the usual in the past few seasons, Braun and Vlasic. Now, for his grades on the year, he got a B during the first quarter, a C plus during the second quarter, a B plus during the third quarter, and then a C in the fourth quarter. In the playoffs, I ended up giving him a C plus. His defense really wasn't all that bad when he was on the ice. His offense was pretty disappointing. And so for the final grade on the season, he ends up getting a rather mediocre C+, not a great year for Justin Braun, and it's what likely to be his final year as a Shark, at least for the foreseeable future, on his way to the Philadelphia Flyers. And so not a great way to end Braun's tenure here as a Shark, but he certainly will be remembered quite fondly by Sharks fans. Class dismissed.